If you were like me, there was an age in your life when Call of Duty Zombies took up a large portion of your time. You would come home from school and play it every day, watch all of the tutorials on YouTube, and try to beat all of the Easter eggs. I know that my vision is largely clouded by nostalgia, but I really don't think there's been any game that has had the community and peak that this game mode had during its Black Ops 3 run. Today, we are going to talk about a map that largely influenced the success of this game. But to do that, we must first take a look back at this game mode's inception all the way back in 2008 in Call of Duty World at War. Something that I used to love about this game mode was how different every game felt. When the Zombies mode was first introduced in World at War, it focused on creating a dark and claustrophobic atmosphere with its maps. The developers were really trying to lean into the survival horror aspect of the Zombies game. This is something you don't see in Call of Duty Zombies today. The colors are vibrant and the characters are quippy, so it's easy to forget where this game mode got its roots. Playing through World at War Zombies, you could also tell that the developers were in the process of coming to understand this new game mode just as much as the audience was. Each map set out in some new direction and introduced mechanics that would become iconic staples to the Zombies game mode. But it was in Treyarch's next game, Black Ops 1, where the Zombies game mode really started to find its bearings. This process started off with the first map that was available right from launch, Kino de Toten. This map is iconic for all the right reasons. It took everything that worked for the maps in World at War and brought it to the new generation in arguably its best form yet. The map was open and dynamic, with plenty of options for players to experiment with the core mechanics of the game mode. Kino de Toten served as a great introductory map for many players, and the hidden map, 5, provided a greater challenge for players who were up to it, as well as just being a fun concept.
Sounds like someone breaking in!
Just a storm, Dick. Sit down.
Black Ops 1 continued to expand on the mechanics of this game mode. There was the fun and experimental experience of Dead Ops Arcade, and the DLC maps were beginning to introduce main story Easter eggs. Let's talk about Easter eggs, because the Easter eggs of Call of Duty Zombies are now central to the experience. But at one point, they didn't even exist. When Black Ops 1's first DLC map Ascension introduced these types of Easter eggs, they served the purpose of bringing the storyline that was happening in these maps to the forefront of the game mode. What was once being hidden in the environment and cryptic messages was now being directly controlled and experienced by the player, with the characters actively commenting on the progression of the story throughout the maps. As Easter eggs began to evolve, the player could get better weapons or perks after completion, so it became worth it, almost essential, to learn how to go through the Easter eggs if you wanted to continue playing the game. The Easter eggs and storylines of Zombies would continue to expand and become more important to the experience until the final map of Black Ops 1, Moon. This map marks the end of the first, more rudimentary era of Call of Duty Zombies. Before Moon, maps were easily able to be picked up and the player could largely ignore the story if they wanted to. But going into Black Ops 2 and beyond, each map would become more complex, with more mechanics to learn and more story to experience. Going into Black Ops 2, the fans of the Zombies game mode were eager to see where the developers would take the game. There was a lot of potential coming off from maps like Ascension, Shangri-La, Call of the Dead, and Moon. And after literally blowing the Earth up in the last Easter egg of Black Ops 1, it seemed like nothing was off the table going into the sequel. But Black Ops 2 opened up to a clunky start with the release of Transit and the side maps of Bus Depot, Farm, and Town. This map was supposed to be great. Essentially being a bunch of different maps crammed into one experience, this map seemed to have the innovation that the players were looking for. But as players began to play the game, there were simply too many problems here to ignore. Transit was hindered by the sheer ambition of the map's creators. Having this large of a map was too much for the hardware of the time, and this meant that between each submap in Transit was a dense layer of fog that was difficult to traverse, with denizens constantly attacking and slowing you down. There were a handful of surprises and Easter egg related reasons to go into the fog, but overall these sections of the map were transition areas that were just made to be transition areas. Combining this with the fact that the bus was on an automated route meant that if you missed a bus and didn't want to traverse the fog, you were stuck in whatever section of the map you missed the bus in. This difficulty of traversing the map made essential mechanics like turning on the power and getting to Pack-a-Punch a needlessly tedious process. The main Easter egg was underwhelming and convoluted, and the new wonder weapon would break after a certain amount of use. After the consistent quality of Black Ops 1, Transit proved to not be enough for many players. This is not to say that Transit was all bad, however. For example, This map introduced the first buildables to the game, which would become a core mechanic. And the truth is that for many players, this map was their first zombies experience. And for all of its flaws, Transit was a fun and interesting map to explore. This, with the fact that the extra sub-maps were playable on their own, with perks and a pack-a-punch available, made it so there were plenty of options for players just getting into the game mode. There was also a new grief mode, player ranking system, and perma-perk system that were all introduced in Black Ops 2 and are generally looked back on fondly. But for many players who grew to enjoy the experience of Black Ops 1, this sequel was certainly lacking something. Unfortunately, players would not be impressed with the first DLC map of Black Ops 2, Die Rise. Just like with Transit, this map wasn't all bad, but there were annoyances that were constantly present, and this was starting to leave a bad taste for the players, who were now 2 maps into this new game and still largely unsatisfied. The biggest fault of Die Rise was that it was simply not designed for fluid and easy movement, which is an essential part of the gameplay of zombies. It was easy to fall off the map, the levels were uneven, the perks would move around, the new perk that was introduced was largely unnecessary, and using the new wonder weapon made traversing the map even more difficult. This made this a frustrating map for many players to play. And again, the Easter egg here just did not deliver. Black Ops 2 was supposed to have all of its Easter eggs connect together to be part of this grand super Easter egg that spanned between maps. This is fun and great in theory, but the way it was executed made it feel more like checking a checkmark in a list than the map having its own complete adventure. Needless to say, many hardcore fans were still unsatisfied with Black Ops 2, and it was evident that this game mode was in dire need of a change. This game mode was once on its way to becoming a staple to the brand of Call of Duty, but now it was on a steady decline, and Treyarch needed the second DLC map to be a hit. This is where Jason Blundell takes over. Just as a quick little bit of background here, for much of the game mode's life, this guy named Jimmy Zielinski was in charge as creative director. He was the guy that had the final say and largely influenced the direction of the game mode. It's easy to look at Zielinski's work in Black Ops 2 and come to the conclusion that he wasn't a good director for the game mode, but that honestly couldn't be further from the truth. Remember that this game mode started off as a small, extra inclusion for players who completed the campaign for World at War. It was never intended to become a third pillar for the very identity of Call of Duty, but it did, and a very large part of that can be directly attributed to this man. If nothing else, Zielinski constantly pushed the game mode into new territory, which is exactly what it needed to become what it has. If Zombies stayed as a simple arcade-style game mode that it was in World at War and Kino der Toten, players would quickly get bored. But it was the constant innovation present in almost every single map that kept players coming back and excited to continue playing, and Zielinski is a huge part of that process. The problem was that Transit and Die Rise showed an obvious failure to understand what made zombies fun. The game mode didn't need to reinvent the wheel. What it needed was a map that took what already worked and honed in on the ideas already present. Transit failed because it was too ambitious for its own good. Die Rise failed because it neglected a very essential part of the zombies experience. Mob of the Dead would succeed because it took everything that players came to love about zombies and focused on emphasizing those aspects. I am eager to start talking about Mob of the Dead, but let's take a quick look at some essential things that work in a zombies map, so that we can come back and see just why Mob of the Dead was so successful. The first thing on this list would probably be giving the player a sense of progress. It is a satisfying and rewarding process to start a game with nothing but a pistol that struggles against a handful of zombies and go to eventually acquiring, building, and upgrading powerful weapons and equipment. The second item on this list would have to be the map's layout. It needs to be intuitive to run through, and after a couple of playthroughs, the player doesn't want to be left guessing what's behind the corners. Think of a 2D Mario level. At the first playthrough you're exploring and understanding the map, but the levels are designed so that eventually you can learn to dash through them quickly. This same concept can be applied to the layout of zombies maps, and also ties back into giving the players a sense of progress, as players want to feel like they're getting better at the game as they play and learn about the map. The layout of the map should also provide some options for different playstyles, including narrow camping spots as well as an open area for training zombies. The third and last thing that we'll add will be innovation. Even though too much emphasis on innovation was one of Tranzit's shortcomings, it is true that at this point in the game mode's life, what makes players look forward to the next map is that it is going to provide a new and unique experience compared to the maps already available. It doesn't have to completely overhaul the game, but players like the process of learning the tricks, intricacies, and new additions of each map. This is an aspect that again ties into the previous examples. A player is simply more likely to keep playing if they feel like they are learning and becoming better at the game while doing so. And having new mechanics to learn can be a healthy part of that. I could go into more aspects, but these are some of the core aspects of a zombies map that are crucial to the player's experience. Now let's finally take a look at Jason Blundell's first map as creative director, Mob of the Dead. The game mode was at an interesting time right before the release of Mob of the Dead. While hardcore fans and those who'd played through and enjoyed Black Ops 1 Zombies were generally disappointed with the quality of the new map so far, Black Ops 2 still had a huge player base from the game's campaign and multiplayer. This meant that no matter how upset Zombies fans were, there was still a solid group of players who would be buying the DLC and downloading the new Zombies map regardless of their interest in the game mode. The trick that Mob of the Dead executed on so seamlessly was pulling in both new and old players alike. The first two Zombies maps of Black Ops 2 followed a group of characters titled the Victus Crew, and this new map being set in Alcatraz meant that we were going to be following a new set of characters. This helped to get rid of a bit of the bad taste that seasoned players had for Black Ops 2 so far. It gave them the sense that this new map was going to be different, and at least should be worth checking out. Also, having zombies invade one of the most famous prisons in the world is just simply really cool, and Treyarch did a great job with the trailers and promotions that led up to the map's release. But still, it is one thing for a map to have a good premise. It is another thing for a map to be a good and functional map that players will like. Let's go back to those three core values of a zombies map and see how well Mob of the Dead did in each respective area. The first aspect was progression, and this map has an excellent sense of progression. There are so many cool items and weapons to go for here, it's almost impossible to get everything in just one playthrough. Having the Pack-a-Punch process be collecting parts and building a plane was an intuitive process that rewarded the player for exploring the map. The new wonder weapon went back to form and was found in the mystery box. But, along with being pack-a-punchable out of the box, this weapon also had an upgrade that you could build and pack-a-punch on its own. This concept combines the best of two worlds, as it gives value to spinning the box, as well as giving the players another objective to aim for. This map also introduced the fan favorite Hell's Retriever, a secondary tactical wonder weapon obtained by feeding zombies to various Hellhound heads across the map. So with all this and more, like the shield and golden spork, there is an abundance of weapons and tools that can be used to progress oneself throughout the map. The second aspect was map layout, and I think where Mob of the Dead really succeeded here was constantly rewarding the player for exploring and learning every area of the map. Whether it was a plane part, a Hellhound, or an Easter egg, the map provided the player with reasons to visit and come back to every section. The map was also very fluid and dynamic. Paths looped on each other and gave players multiple options to go from one place to another, making it easy to keep moving and not get stuck in any particular area of the map. This, along with a variety of opened and closed sections, meant that traversing the zombies and getting from one place to another was an intuitive process that rewarded creativity, making the map layout of Mob of the Dead a certain success. The final core aspect that we went over was innovation, and surprise surprise, Mob of the Dead excelled here too. Where the map really succeeded here was the fact that every new mechanic was relatively easy to learn. For example, a huge new thing that is unique to Mob of the Dead is the afterlife mechanic. This provided a new way for players to get revived from being down, as well as being an essential aspect to power the map. And instead of surprising players with this mechanic when they first get down, the map opens up with you in the afterlife mode, giving you time to explore what one can do here and learn the purpose of this new idea. Mob of the Dead also did a good job of giving players hints on what was going on throughout the map. Afterlife symbols were posted in places where it could be used, zombies that were killed around hellhounds flew into their mouth, and experimenting and trying new things often rewarded the player. The key thing that Mob of the Dead teaches us is that innovation and adding new things to the game mode can be wildly beneficial, but everything needs to have a purpose that directly benefits the player's experience. The player wants to learn everything about the map, but they also want to feel rewarded and smart for doing so. One more thing to mention is Brutus, aka the Warden, and I want to talk about this because Mob of the Dead took a concept from Tranzit and made massive improvements to its inclusion. The Avogadro was a special enemy that came into the game once you turned on the power in Tranzit. Here, the enemy wasn't particularly dangerous, but would shock your character and slow you down and mess up your movement. And he was only affected by EMPs and melee attacks, making it tedious to deal with. This made the Avogadro more annoying than it was dangerous. But in Mob of the Dead, Brutus would spawn in, and his impact was immediately felt, and he had to be quickly dealt with. Brutus did a massive amount of damage, and he was an honest threat whenever he was around. But headshots did a lot of damage to him, which provided a reliable strategy for dealing with him. His movement was also similar to that of the regular zombies, with a little more speed and strength, meaning that if he appeared on a high round or in the middle of a herd, he could be corralled with the mob to be more easily managed. These two enemies differ largely due to how they were incorporated into the mob of zombies. The Avogadro acts as a sore thumb that won't go away. Brutus is a threatening presence that adds to the difficulty, but because strategies exist for dealing with him efficiently, his presence is more of a challenge than a hindrance. There's almost no end to how much you could talk about this map. The characters and voice actors are iconic, the story and Easter egg was new and engaging, and so far I didn't even go into talking about the new perk Electric Cherry or the Pack-a-Punch area. I could go on and on, but for right now, I want to talk about where the game mode went after the release of Mob of the Dead and how this map influenced the future. Mob of the Dead didn't just revitalize interest in the zombies game mode, it didn't just bring new players to the experience. It single-handedly made Black Ops 2, which was a mediocre zombies experience up until this point, a must-have for any zombies enjoyer, and to this day, without a true and honest remake from Treyarch, Black Ops 2 remains an almost essential zombies game simply because you cannot get Mob of the Dead anywhere else. The zombies game mode wasn't just back, it was at the best it has ever been, and all future map releases would take inspiration from Mob of the Dead. Jimmy Zielinski would be given control of one last map, with DLC 3 of Black Ops 2, and while I really liked Buried and think the map is looked back on as fun and unique, there are definite annoyances that occur. But from DLC 4 Origins into Black Ops 3, Jason Blundell would fully take over as creative director of the Zombies game mode, and he would lead the experience into its most successful era yet. And none of it would have been possible without the release of Mob of the Dead. This is a game mode where every player has their own preferences, and there are a lot of maps that can have a solid argument for why it is the best map ever. But there is no argument for which map had the biggest influence on the game. Almost every single map that came out after Mob of the Dead would follow at least some of the ideas that came from here. The Easter egg steps would be baked right into the natural progression of the map, making solving Easter eggs a more enticing option for players who may not have been previously interested. Brutus would go on to inspire the creation of the Panzer and other special enemies and zombies. The Hell's Retriever would inspire other specialty wonder weapons, and so much more. If mood separated zombies from simple arcade-style maps to more Easter egg and story-focused maps, Mob of the Dead would change how the zombies experience was approached. It wouldn't be enough for future maps to just be good. When making new maps, the developers of the game mode would have to start asking, what did Mob of the Dead teach us? And with that, I am not Caden. Thank you for listening.